Hello, my name is Isaac and I've been a developer for about 10 years now. Noble roles, I was CTO, co-founder of a funded startup, investor backed, and I was lead developer at one of the UK's largest e-commerce retailers. Today I wanted to talk about bug fixes. I don't think there's actually too much documented on like how people process going through them. I know for me, I've been doing a lot of contracting recently, and I often come into code bases that I'm completely unfamiliar with, and this is what I imagine a lot of juniors go through when they first start a job or they're working on something, which is like, how am I debugging and working on code that I don't know or really understand. So this is the framework I'm using. It's kind of loose, but the great thing about that is the steps do make sense and they work for every size of problem that I've come across. So for me, this is great. Hopefully it's of some use to you. The acronym I use is CAFFE, CAFFE, for all the different steps. C starting with clarify, which is just like, can you reproduce it? 'Cause if you can't reproduce it, then how do we know if we fixed it or if it's even actually a bug? I don't think there's a lot to go over there. It's basically just understanding what should happen and what is actually happening. So very simple. That's like a precursor. Then A, autopsy, is actually finding whereabouts in the code it's erroring. Now, again, this should also be automatic. If you're getting the stack output saying that, the code is erroring at this line in this file, perfect. You go there, you know where it is. Is this part of a larger section of code or the line that it's pointing at? If you go into it, is it a function of itself and there's something erroring inside that you need to be aware of? So it's actually finding the specific exact line of where it's erroring. Sometimes the error isn't actually breaking the code though, right? So an example of this would be, let's say if you had a checkout and you've got an item that's £10, so 10.00. If the point value was missing, it would actually show up in the checkout as like £1,000, which obviously isn't what you want. So although that's not actually like a line of code erroring and you don't have a stack output for it, autopsy, like, you at least know where it's showing up and you can identify it and you can basically start the investigation. So great. And the next two steps are F's, and they start with like fix and the reason is because sometimes the previous step actually will fix it for you. So like I mentioned with the autopsy, like by actually finding where something errors exactly, you might have not even called like the function properly, or like you might be using the wrong variables, or you've not underscored it correctly or something. So sometimes just autopsying it can actually fix it. But if not, F is for follow the lead. And that is basically for every input that goes through this function where it's erroring, you need to follow it back individually to find its root. This could be environment variables, parameters in the method, but basically just anything that can change, that will change. So sometimes actually, if I'm working on a new code base, I will actually write these down. It is kind of brute forcey, but when you're starting on a new code base, you kind of need to do brute force to get your reps in so that you actually understand it and can work more intuitively in the future. So brute force isn't bad at this stage. So the next step is F for fix or flush out. For the previous step where you followed the leads, you trace everything back. Again, by virtue of that step, you may have seen something that shouldn't have been there. Like, let's say it's like vanilla JavaScript and it's like you try to use something as a number, but when you go to where it's initialized, it's actually a string or something like that. So you might have already fixed it. If you haven't, for each individual pathway that you find, it's a case of making sure that you run through it individually and check that there's nothing wrong with that pathway. So however an input has made its way to the function or whatever that's erroring. So super lo-fi, but sometimes I literally will just add console logs of like output to see what things are along the pathway and to see if they've errored. Sometimes I will actually remove entire sections of code. Like if we got a certain variable and that, there's mutations that happen between where it starts and where it goes into the function that we're autopsying, just removing that entire code will actually show me like, okay, does it still error? Do we get the output? Or even if it's a different error, if it's a different error, then the thing that was causing the error before is now unblocked. So I think about it like water, like it's progressing down the stream. Like water's supposed to flow downwards and something's blocking it. And by taking out parts individually, does the water come through at the bottom? And by doing that, you can see which part is actually the problem. A cool way to do this as well is actually to use unit tests. So for the things that you need to flesh out and test, it's a little bit longer to do, but it kind of regression proofs it as well, right? So if I write a unit test for a function that's, let's say we have the price that comes in, and then it errors at the very end, and in between, the only thing that we really do is maybe like add tax to it or something like that. The function that adds tax, if you write a unit test on it, you can check that it's working. And if the unit test fails, that's actually brilliant, because now when you fix it, it's regression proofed. Because if anyone else makes the same mistake, it's gonna error. So it's actually like useful for the future. If you can unit test that, I would advise. You're gonna have to do unit tests anyway, to be honest. So actually creating failing tests is great because it's like test-driven development anyway. And the last step is E for enforce, which is just, if you've not added unit tests, it's not too complicated. The whole point of this is just make it harder for someone else to break it. Say problem that you found was for something specific, like there's been like a framework change, you guys updated your node version, and because of that, one of the tools you're using doesn't work with it. Literally just having comments in the code and then linking to the documentation could be like the Stack Overflow, or just explaining it, massively helpful for anyone else that comes across it. So yeah, it's actually a pretty simple framework, but very useful. And especially if you don't know what you're doing, I know it helps me do it better, and this is what I use. Hopefully it's of some use to you, and yeah, share it with someone else if you think it will be of use to them. Thanks guys.